Welcome. Hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. I'm sorry we had to start a little late, but I want to talk to you very, very briefly about the new, improved, better than ever NewSpace business plan competition. In case you noticed, we didn't have a BPC this year, and probably some of you have wondered, hey, Tom, why wouldn't we have a BPC this year? Well, let me tell you. As we were going through our usual ramping up process and we were talking to new prospects, we were always out fundraising and doing other things and finding ways to collaborate. And all these opportunities started coming our way that would not come to fruition until 2016. And we sat down and we took a good hard look at all this and says, why don't we punt for this year? And then go around and build something really incredible, the kind of BPC that we've always wanted to build in the first place. We sat down, not with a blank sheet of paper, mind you, but just with the idea that if the funding was not so much a problem, if there was other things that what could we want, what do we really want to do? If we could put anything down on a piece of paper to make this BPC even bigger and better than ever. And we looked at the resources that were coming down the pipeline, and we looked at each other, we said, you know, we can do not all of this stuff, but we can do a bunch of it right now in 2016. And that's what came out of this. And I'm going to go forward and just give you a brief introduction today on what we have to look forward to for next year. But first, as I always do in presentations like this, I like to say thank you. We have gotten as far as we have and built this great infrastructure with the help of a lot of really great people and a lot of great resources. And I want to take a minute just to give a shout out to those who have really been of value to us in building the business plan competition into what it is today. And I certainly want to start with the Heinlein Prize Trust. They have been the earliest of early adopters of our program. For over a decade, they have provided us. They started out with little bits of money and says, well, let's see what these guys can do with it. And it has grown and grown and grown. And they've always been just ardent supporters of our cause and of what we do. And I'll be talking a little bit more about them later, but I want to thank them very much. Also, another great supporter of ours has been the Space Angels Network. Now, they don't provide prize money per se, but they provide something of equal value, which is themselves. They have a really incredible network that they've built of angel investors and advisors and and coaches and other kind of people. We've gotten some great coaches and even some great judges out of Space Angels Network over the years, and we still hope to have a continued collaboration with them. They've been a contributing sponsor for a very long time, and we're going to continue that relationship. But what really got us to the next level is a unique opportunity that we took advantage of between 2011 and 2013 with the Space Portal at NASA Ames through a grant program. Through that program, we managed to award well over $200,000 in prize money to very deserving companies for the NewSpace business plan competition. And through that investment, we were able to also build our infrastructure and build our boilerplate for how we do things on a regular basis and made it more efficient. And it just became the competition that it is now because of this. So a big shout out to the guys at Ames, Bruce Pittman, who's sitting here, Dan Rasky, who I'll introduce shortly, and Alex McDonald, and Charles Miller, who actually kicked it all off for us. Thank you to those guys for making that happen. And of course, when we first got involved with Orbital ATK, it was simply ATK. But they have provided prize money, they've provided a lot of assistance in many ways, and we still have a relationship established with them, and we hope to continue that going forward. And they were our first major corporate sponsor for the NewSpace BPC, and they're still there, and we're still working with them. And so I want to be a big shout out to Orbital ATK for their support of this program. Now, here's what we decided to do. So far, we're extending our competition cycle to a 2-year cycle. So technically, looking backwards, we're already halfway through it because we're doing the competition next year. But we built up key things, and then we're going to now expand on those and launch them starting today. So we have developed an infrastructure of various industry resources, personal resources. We've reached out to the investor community in a big way. And we realized what we had built over the years was just an amazing mailing list and an amazing Rolodex of the kinds of people who can pitch in and help and who want to and who like it. And we have lots of coaches and judges and people that we have recruited and say, it's a shame to only use those resources for a very brief period once a year. How else can we make this better? How else can we add more value to the contestants and the finalists for the competition itself? And so we're starting a longer competition cycle. It's a very different mode of entry, but finalists and some other groups will have access to these kinds of resources that we're going to be providing much earlier in the process than waiting until next July and just attending a boot camp for a day and a half. Basically, it's going to be an online boot camp that goes on for maybe 2 or 3 months prior to the competition itself. And we're building and deploying some new tools to help do this. And it's going to be very encouraging for everyone. Let me go. So as a result of that, we already have in the pipeline a wider variety of sponsors and collaboration partners. And we're going to have bigger and greater prizes and a wider variety of prizes going forward. Let's explain how that's going to work. We've really revamped our method of entering the competition itself. In the past, what we've done is essentially, okay, we declare the competition's open, send us your 2 or 3 page executive summary, and we filter that through a group of people that we recruit that actually look at these plans and look at certain parameters, and they score everybody, and we have lots of conversations, and so every once in a while a conference call from hell. And we end up with somewhere between 8 and 10 finalists as a result of that. We're going to do it. We're still going to do some of that. That option is still there. But now we're going to expand, and we're going to start earlier, and we're going to have actual regional, like mini competitions. The winner from each one of those will automatically become a finalist to be entered in the main competition next July. And why can we do this? Because funny things happen in the last couple of 3 years. Certain entrepreneurial incubator groups have started forming in key areas that's close to our industry, in New York, in LA, and in other places. And we're reaching out to those groups, and they've had a keen interest in hosting and sponsoring one of these mini regional competition events, which hopefully we'll stream online and do all those good things. So at least our goal is to have 4 to 5 of these over the next 8-9 months, and then winners from each one will be able to come and compete. And we'll also have some wild card entries that we'll get the old-fashioned way, in case they can't attend one of these events or for some other reason. And so starting out, our first 2 collaborators on this effort is an incubator down in Los Angeles called Lightspeed. And they've already volunteered to step up for our first session, which will be in October. So stay tuned. We're going to be announcing that, the exact dates and times and how to apply very, very soon. If you're not on Curtis's mailing list, get on Curtis's mailing list, because that's a lot of the information is going to be fed through that. And then the other group is, I've been to this group's meetings. They're in called NewSpace, New York. And that's also run very, very well, and they're thrilled to be a part of this as well. And we're probably looking to do a second competition, regional competition, early next year. And there are groups in 2 other states that we're talking to right now, and there's a third one we just thought of last night at dinner. So we're going to be approaching them. So the glue, the backbone, the core of a lot of our new initiative is going to be the new and ever-improving NewSpaceBPC.com website. We started right now by first we're going to start the conversation. We've just launched a new forum page today. And so you can go there and sign up and create an account, and we're all going to start this conversation together, and that's how we start down this road, to get a little more social and a little more conversant and do a little more outreach through that portal. And we're going to use that portal for a lot of other things. We're going to be hosting, we'll have coaches hosting webinars and other kinds of things to help as the educational process, as our process towards the competition draws to a close. The contestants will have the opportunity to interact online with coaches much earlier in the process than they ever could before. They'll get assigned a coach sometime in April, and they'll be able to have long-term, long-growing conversations. Do this for me and come back in a week and tell me what you did, kind of thing. And that conversation will continue. And they'll be even more ready than they've ever been before when they finally get to the big show in July up in Seattle. So this is exciting. So get on there, create a profile, talk to us. Tell us what we're doing, tell us what you think we need to do. And to finalize, we're going to, since this is only a brief introduction, we've decided to have a little event that we're going to talk about this some more, and you're all welcome to join us. It's right next door in the next room over here. It starts at 5:45 this evening. It's a meet and greet, open house. Anybody can come. Sponsored by Heinlein Trust, so you get to hear Art Dula and Buckner Hightower say their usual, inspiring and pithy words, and I always look forward to that. And there'll be some other announcements as well, but we'll all have a chance to chat in further detail about all the new great things that are coming down the pipeline with the NewSpace Business Plan Competition for 2016. It's going to shape up to be a battle in Seattle, and I hope you're all there. Thanks so much. Now, in the interest of efficiency, I have been asked to introduce the moderator for the next panel that's coming up with Space Entrepreneurs War Stories. I want to introduce to you someone I got a chance to had the honor of working with when we were working with Ames at the Space Portal for the BPC for 3 years, and that's Dr. Dan Rasky. Now. Here's a lot of things I didn't know about Dan. I knew he helped run the Space Portal, but I didn't know that he was like this expert on advanced entry systems and thermal protection. He actually invented something called a phenolic impregnated carbon ablator that is actually now being used by SpaceX on their Dragon capsule. It's also being used in other probes like the Mars missions and the which one is it? No. Stardust, I'm sorry. It's the Stardust return capsule. Made one of the fastest re-entries ever in the history of return capsules. It hit about 50 Gs, I understand. But obviously the heat shield held together and the capsule held together, and all was well with that. But he has made significant contributions to flight hardware used on NASA missions and private missions. And he actually got an Inventor of the Year award for 2007. Was the first person from Ames to get that award. So he's going to be moderating the panel. Please welcome Dan Rasky.
Thank you very much. Could my panelists join me up front here? Let's get comfortable. This up, testing, good. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for letting us, not up, is it up, no. Hello?
Houston, we have a problem.
Hello?
Not much.
We'll find that. Triple redundancy. Thank you. Hello? Oh, that's working. Well, welcome everyone, and I am pleased to be able to moderate this panel. And I want to start off with a couple words: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And no, I'm not describing my panelists.
I want to know which one I am.
I am describing the experience that almost every innovator and entrepreneur faces through their life journeys. And we have 4 individuals here that have, tons of experience, and I'm sure all 4 of those adjectives, and in working through their various innovations and entrepreneurial efforts. And I think you'll find quite interesting. I know through my career, I found it very helpful, even at my late stage, to still hear these war stories and experiences to see, okay, how did I do things right and how did I do things wrong relative to the various challenges that I have faced. So let me just first briefly introduce each of the panelists, and then I'm going to ask each of you to give kind of more depth as far as your background that you're willing to reveal at this point. And I was joking with Khaki, you know, the names can be changed to protect. But, and then we have a series of questions I'd like to ask each of the panelists, and then we'll get to your questions as well. So first, to my left, this is Rex Reidenauer, and he is the CEO of Ecliptic. And he and I go back a few years now. Beside him is Bruce Pittman.
No, I'm Bob Richards.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Okay, Bob Richards couldn't join us today because of appendicitis, apparently. And we were joking it's a minor organ. You know, he could have sucked it up and made it. But anyhow, but thankfully Bruce was willing to step in on his behalf. And Bruce works with us at the Space Portal. He's the chief systems engineer at the Space Portal, and has, again, a very wide and varied background. And we'll see if he talks about his first experiences at NASA, which are quite interesting. And then beside Bruce is Khaki Roadway. And I first met Khaki when she was at X-Corps. And she has now moved on to a new activity, which I'm really interested to hear more about, doing the Director of Marketing and Business Development for a NewSpace New York City. And beside her is Daniel Faber, and he is the CEO of Deep Space Industries. And I think we first met Daniel a couple years ago now when he came on board at Deep Space Industries. And again, looking through Daniel's biography, he has, again, quite a varied background. So with that, let me come back to you, Rex, and let's just go one by one and have you talk a little bit about your background and so on that you want to go into.
Okay, does this work? Yeah. Dan, the problem was you didn't turn it on. Yeah, so I've always been in the space industry. It's coming up on 37 years now, which is kind of scary. But for the first 18, I was a mission and systems engineer working on what turned out to be leading edge efforts across the board. I worked on the first commercial satellites deployed out of the space shuttle and several more that were designed just for space shuttle launch. And I worked on Hubble up at Lockheed here up the road a ways. When they were still designing it for crew servicing, and I was in a emerging commercial astronaut office, one of the first NewSpace-y sort of things that came up. That was in 1980. I also worked at JPL on over a decade on Voyager going to Neptune, for example, Deep Space One, which was the first ion-propelled spacecraft, and all sort of technical positions and all pretty much related to leading-edge things. And I got more and more interested in small satellites, so in I first tried to get into the small satellite business in 1985 for a spin-off from Utah State University, which is still very active with small sats. And unfortunately, their business plan was based on space shuttle deployment of small sats, and a month after I got there, the Challenger blew up. So did the business plan. But I left again for commercial space about halfway through my career now, and I've been involved with entrepreneurial space ventures ever since, with a focus on trying to make commercial missions beyond geosynchronous orbit happen, which is where almost all commercial activity completely ends right now. I was involved with the only spacecraft that's gone farther out commercially, and that was satellite rescue that went to the moon. Involved with that, kind of helped enable that to happen. Been working on other ideas ever since at Space Dev, Blastoff, and now Ecliptic. And I assume we'll get into what our companies are, so I won't go into what Ecliptic's doing, but that thread continues in that company. So I've been basically sort of a classic engineer in the classic space industry the first half of my career. Now I'm in this commercial side, and I'm going to stay here.
Thank you, Rex. Bruce?
So Rex and I go way back. We actually, so like 1979, 1980 something. Yeah. So we started a thing. One of the projects we worked together is The first one of these conferences I ever put on was in 1979. I was a NASA civil servant and just young and bright-eyed and, very optimistic, about. So we were going to do and it was just almost this time of year, because we were doing a thing for the 10th anniversary of the first lunar landing. So this was going to be July 20th, 1979. And so we put on this big thing up in San Francisco, and we did this. And one of my co-chair at the conference, a guy named Stan Kent, and he kind of flabbergasted us all when at the end of this conference he announces this thing called the Viking Fund. And it was to collect money to fund the Viking lander. So as far as I know, this is the first crowd-funded space project that was ever done. And because NASA had landed on the moon with the Viking on Mars, I'm sorry, in 76, and here in 79 they were going to shut it down for want of $17 million. And we thought that was kind of ridiculous considering what we had done. So we were going to have this campaign to raise money for this. And so Rex and I worked on this together. And this is funny because this is where Bob Richards and our paths first crossed. Because one of the things that Stan had been able to do was Kathy Keaton was the editor of Omni Magazine, or the publisher of Omni Magazine. And so she liked space. She was really turned on by space. And so she was giving us free full-page ads in Omni Magazine. And so we had this artist drop this thing, and Rex has still got some of these things, I believe. And it shows the Viking lander with, and its robot arm, it has a tin cup with some pencils in it. And it says, "Feed a starving robot, the Viking Fund," and it gives our P.O. box. And so we were doing this. Well, it turns out years later I found out that Bob Richards was in college at the time. He saw those, and he said, well, he and this guy named Peter Diamandis, you may have heard of him, we're starting this thing called SEDS, and you may also have heard of that. And so he writes to Kathy Keaton, and he goes, "I see that you're doing this thing for the Viking Fund. Would you do this for SEDS as well?" And she did. So one part of being an entrepreneur is, find something that's working and see if you can leverage off of it. So I thought that was really bright on Bob's part. So one of the advantages of being in this business a long time is, as Heinlein says, old age does not bring wisdom, but it does bring perspective. And so and Dan said the good, the bad, the ugly, and then it gets really dark, and there's a lot of really good lessons to be learned there, and hopefully we'll talk about some of them. But I think that the number one I would say to you is, trust yourself. Find something that you're really excited about and go after it, because life is too short for little dreams. And I think I'll save the rest of it for later.
Thank you, Bruce. By the way, and I remember seeing that Viking Fund advertisement in Omni as well when I was in high school at the time. So yeah, it did have impact, Bruce. Kaki.
Kaki Rodway, NewSpace NYC. And I'm not going to go into my full bio, but I'll tell you what I've been doing the last 10 years. And that is working in this industry. I was with XCorp and until December, so January, I left the wild, vibrant city of Mojave, California, and moved to this provincial town on the East Coast called New York City, a little town. Yeah, it's provincial, really is. I mean, people don't get out of their 2-block radius. Actually, that's going far if you do. So, if you don't believe me, come visit. So, I think my bio is in there. It's a whole long trajectory to where I got to XCorp in 5, but essentially I had the skill that enabled me to get to XCorp, and it enabled me to be a program manager, operations manager actually, of a $5 million contract in geoscience on something called the Ocean Drilling Program. And that skill is writing. And it has helped me throughout my career. And so when I talk to people, and I talk to people about getting into the space industry, well, they say I'm not a mathematician, or I'm not an engineer, don't have this technical skills. I said, you need the other skills. You need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to analyze, be able to research. I mean, there's whole other avenues out there in this commercial space industry that we will need to fill, including, I've always thought of this, but how the heck are you going to cut somebody's hair in microgravity when it's sticking straight up? So fashion, art, all of these things apply to space. And plumbing, that's what rocket engines are, right? Newton's third law of motion and chemistry and a lot of plumbing. So NewSpace NYC, unlike Rex, I'm just going to get right into it because I want to tell you what we're doing. It's actually very exciting. We're building an ecosystem in New York City to advance space exploration technologies. And yeah, who would have thought New York? But it's there. So we're bringing together investors, entrepreneurs, customers, government policymakers, all of the aspects, all of the elements that you have in New York are there. We do Friday nights, we have Friday night space talks, and it is whomever is in town or people that we've reached out to that we know in the area. In fact, I met, May, we had something called the World Science Festival, and NASA has a big presence there. And it's just, it's great. It's almost like a zoo. They have something called a science street fair on Sunday, and if anybody's been to New York, sometimes you stumble into these street fairs where they close off blocks and just have vendors all throughout. Well, this was all about science. You had NASA, you had the Museum of Natural History, you had teachers in space. I mean, there was a thing where kids were getting an astronaut experience by basically hanging them upside down. And so I met this guy named Frank O'Brien who has written a book about the Apollo computer system. Let's bring him in. Let's talk to him. Let's network. Let's talk to each other. So that's what we're doing. We're doing these networking events, these education activities, and at the same time, we are providing business and marketing services to startups and to other entities in the business. We got some cool things coming down the pike, and I guess just I say wait till the end of the year before you can see that, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So our mission is to support and promote these ventures in New York City and beyond. And just to give you an example, we had a panel, sort of our kickoff panel, and we had investors there. We had some folks who are in the industry, like Honeybee Robotics. And yeah, I mean, mostly investors and people in the industry. We thought, we'll be doing well if we have 30 people show up. We had over 80, some estimates 100 people. And these are all people who, it's almost like they're coming out of the closet saying, yeah, I had to go into IT, and I'm in a finance company, and I've always loved space. And that's what we have. And it's turned a faucet on.
Thank you very much. Daniel?
I'll say a bit on Bob's behalf. He's quite a trooper. Despite being in the emergency with appendicitis, he did send us a message which let us slip Bruce in at the last moment. So that's one of his war stories. When you're an entrepreneur, you keep communicating. I'm not used to talking about myself. It's a little indulgent. I often just talk about the team that I work with because Deep Space Industries has a pretty amazing bunch of folks, all of whom have been looking at asteroid mining and space resources for quite a long time. And they really have some interesting history and war stories about how the industry has got now to what really is a sort of inflection point that you can feel it in not just space resources, but the whole new space community. But yeah, I'm supposed to talk about myself apparently. Where do I start? I tried to get into the space industry straight out of university. First thing that happened was I got fired. I had lined up a job in the UK, being in Australia, and a week before I was supposed to start, they called me up and said, have you bought a ticket yet? Great, don't. The politics, yeah, it matters, and I think I was quite lucky because I ended up going into the microsatellite and small satellite world, and because I had ambitions to get people off this rock and had decided that mining asteroids was the way to do it, building low-cost, high-performance spacecraft was probably the best thing that could ever have happened. And I managed to take that then into the mining industry, doing instrumentation for the mining industry. I can tell you, trying to raise money at the height of a financial crisis is not a good thing to do either. So I pay a little bit of attention to business cycles and the like now, which again is one reason that I'm excited about Deep Space Industries. The cycles have lined up quite spectacularly for where we're at, and I could talk about the economics for a while, but that's probably not what we're here for. Yeah, Deep Space Industries is going quite strong right now. With I could tell you war stories about that as well. The founding of the company, the bringing together of the team, and sort of picking our direction, and as any startup company, searching for a business model that is going to work. Thankfully, we have a great vision, and we have a great team, so that came together well. I'm just going to pass it back. We'll get the questions.
That's fine. Very good. Well, thank you very much. The first question I put to the panel is that what achievement are you willing to talk about that you could describe? First, when did the idea or the opportunity present itself, and then the key twists and turns that led to you being able to achieve it? Starting with Rex.
Hey, Ecliptic started from the ashes of another company that is also known as a NewSpace company called Blastoff Corporation, which Blastoff was basically the inspiration for the Google Lunar X Prize eventually. But we were trying to put together a lunar lander rover, robotic rover that would visit an Apollo site. We had, this was all during the year 2000. We were funded by a dot-com billionaire. We had 50 people, really talented people. And after the dot-com bubble popped over the holidays in 2000, 2001, we got shut down in one day. And a previous NewSpace company called Space Dev before Blastoff, and during that time I had met one billionaire, your local billionaire, and we were desperate to try to keep Blastoff going. We had a couple of meetings with this guy, and then we got shut down. We had a third meeting scheduled the very next day. So as a courtesy, we wanted to just have the meeting and thank him for his time and kind of gracefully bow out. And when we told him we had this team of 50 with no job, he just about wet his pants, frankly. And so he challenged us to start, think of a different company that was a little less ambitious, but product-oriented. Product-oriented space technology company, and he said, don't throw me an idea with 50 people, but try me for a dozen people. So with no job and sort of in a panicky situation, in about a week and a half, we came up with what we thought were some pretty good ideas that met his requirements. Went back to him, iterated once or twice. In 3 weeks, we had a handshake company. 3 weeks later, we opened our doors, and he wrote a big check. And then what we told him we were going to do is rugged onboard video system, and a real focused objective. And he bought that 3 weeks after we opened our product line like that in the world that we were competing with. Asked us if the company behind that asked us if we wanted to buy it from them. So we did. And 5 weeks into the company, we bought our only competitor out. And the very day we signed that contract was our first launch of the rocket cam system, which was already had 13 missions, no failures, 4 customers. So in the next 3 months, we got 8 other contracts in the next 3 months, which more than compensated us for what we purchased the product line for. And so 6 or 8 months into it, we still have we had 11 people to start. that whole process was just smooth as a whistle. So I'm saying, what's so hard about startups? What's the big deal? And so anyway, so I think the achievement from that point on, that was that seemed relatively easy. And I got picked as CEO because I had to make sure this billionaire was happy. I'm the guy that found him, so boom. But anyway, so we're a space avionics and sensor systems company, basically. Started with 13 launches when we bought the product line. Now we're up to 125. And no system failures. We've been on 25 spacecraft and 100 and so rockets. And we've only lost 2, and those were on launch vehicle failures last year. But I think the achievement I'm most proud of is that with almost no planning and just, basically a week and a half of thinking, we started this company. We've had a launch ever since we started every 4 to 8 weeks, the whole time. I haven't lost any of them except for those failures. We did it all with 11 people or less. We're still at 11 people. And we completely redid our product line twice in that time to address market changes and whatnot. We got through 2 near-death downturns. We were really close to dying. Recovered from those, and all the same, we became profitable after 4 years, in an annual sense. But really, for the last 13, we've been break-even in spite of all this drama. And we've gotten all these iconic images that you've probably all seen from Shuttle, Atlas, Delta, Spaceship One, almost everything you see except for SpaceX. And we're really proud of that. We've kind of put on the map the idea of video on rockets and spacecraft and made that stick, especially for spacecraft. And I'm very humbled by the same time we started, basically, another Aussie, I believe it was, Nick Woodman in Australia, same exact business statement, rugged video systems, but not for rockets and spacecraft, but everything else. And he's the GoPro guy. And completely, because he got the rest of it. Yeah, we got the fun, exciting part.
And he gets the money.
We do the hard stuff. But our investor is our only investor to date. He's very happy. He's still our chairman. And what I'm really proud of is we've done all this without giving up any equity. And in fact, our employees have actually gained equity during the time. We haven't given any of it away. So we're really positioned well now for growth, and we're essentially break even, so the rest should be all gravy, unless there's enough. But we're really proud of just basically how we executed with almost no planning and no experience whatsoever. So.
Very good, very interesting. Bruce?
So my first adventure in entrepreneurship, let me back up for a minute. So I actually started off a NASA civil servant actually while I was still in college. I joined the co-op program and that was a really good thing for me because I really hated being a college student. I mean, it really was boring and so I didn't really like being a student, but because of the co-op program, I really knew I liked being an engineer, because if you could get through the textbooks and all that actually doing it was a lot of fun. So I was able to stick it out, and then I did that for about 11 years, and then the entrepreneurial bug hit me, so I went off and did a bunch of things. And one of the first entrepreneurial things I did was, when I was with NASA, I was a study manager on a thing called LDR, which was the last of the great observatories. This was the large deployable reflector. So we were trying to put up a 20-meter infrared sub-millimeter telescope, and my job was to try to get the cost down under $2 billion. To come up with a $50 million technology development program and all that. Well, it turns out that, when I took over the program in 1984, they told me to be ready for an 87 new start. And by 1985, my 87 new start was now a 97 new start, and it was receding into the future at faster than real time. So my last official act as a civil servant was we had a big workshop down at Asilomar in California. And scientists and engineers. We had a big banquet at the end of this thing, and so the joke is that I should go get a deputy project manager who was in elementary school, so one of us could live to see this thing fly. So this is what's kind of morphed into web now, and we're trying to bring in web for slightly more than $2 billion. So I decided it was time for a change. So I left NASA, and one of the guys that I had hired as a consultant on DR was a guy named Tom Taylor. And Tom was a civil engineer of all things, but he was kind of enamored with the external tank. And so I had hired him because he had come up with this idea for a thing called the aft cargo carrier. And so we had worked on that, and we had looked at, could you use this to launch LDR and all that and get it up into space and then assemble it on this new space station. And that's a whole other story. But after I left NASA, he contacted me, said, you know, we're doing this thing. I've got this guy, Bob Citron, and that I've been working with. He's got this company called SpaceHab. And we're trying to figure out how to get this thing on the space shuttle. He said, are you interested? And I go, that sounds like, you know? So we started trying to figure out how to do this. Remember, this is like 1985. And NASA's basic, you know, let's just say the reception was not real warm. It was kind of like, what part of hell no do you not understand? And to be fair to NASA, this shows you morphing your idea. Citron's original idea was he wanted to put a crew module in the cargo bay and fly tourists. And NASA goes, no way, absolutely never, under any circumstances is that going to happen. And so, again, good entrepreneur, don't give up. So he ran into Tom Taylor, and so they started working together, and they did what was really important. They asked a better question, and they said, well, what would work? What would be valuable to you? And they said, and this is really true if you've ever been in the level, it is tiny. I mean, if you're down in the mid-deck, you can, on the TV it looks big because they're using a fisheye camera, but you can reach out and touch both walls of the mid-deck in the space shuttle. It is tiny. So what they said is some more storage space. You know, just, you know, for shoes and socks and underwear and food and whatever. And so that's how this thing started off. And so, you know, it was one of those things, but how do you get credibility? You know, none of us had ever built anything commercially of anywhere near this size, much less flown it on a manned space system. At that point, I had had no experience in manned space. Stuff had been unmanned space flight, you know, planetary exploration, cryogenic infrared astronomy. So I didn't know anything about crewed systems at all. But yet, through a persistence and a optimism, we were able to look for opportunities. Like one story I'll tell that I think was pivotal to this whole thing, and it's a little bit dodgy, but it actually worked. So what we did is we had a full-scale mock-up of this thing built. SpaceHab module, what it was going to look like, and it was made by a company down in Southern California, and it was made out of plywood. You know, so it was you know, kind of a high-low fidelity or a low-high fidelity kind of a model, but it kind of looked cool and everything. And then we hired Byron Lichtenberg and Owen Garrett to come up, and we took some video of them in the SpaceHab module, just walking around, and we had some mid-deck lockers and stuff like that. And then we took her to the IAC in the International Astronautical Congress in Innsbruck, and we had a big booth there, and we're showing this video. And you know, here it is, this module, and we're got astronauts in there, and so we didn't say it was real, but everybody just kind of thought it was real. And so then I'm giving seminars on user accommodations and all this, and we're handing out questionnaires everybody like to do, and then we're asking for letters of intent. And so people would write us letters. If you can provide this capability on this date at this price point, we would be interested in your thing. And then we were able to go take those letters of intent to NASA to see there's a market other than you for this technology. And so, you know, to make a long story short, like it took like another 7 or 8 years, but we were able to get a contract. We were able to raise a bunch of money, $140 million, and build the module, fly it on the space shuttle 17 times, and all that. So it just shows you that, and frankly, when we started this, I didn't think we had a prayer. I mean, I was just doing this because it was kind of a cool thing to do. If I'd known it was going to work, I would have asked for more stock. So that's my story.
Thank you, Bruce Gacke.
Yeah, so this is the ugly, right? We're talking
Whatever
works. Well, I'm going to talk in a generic sense. If I can get into details, but I need you to buy me a drink before we do that. So the war that I have seen, it's a discontent, let's call it that, is between business and engineering or technology, because engineers want to build their thing. Business wants to make a case for that thing. Business needs to make a case for that thing. And that's what I've seen. I mean, I've heard to the point where engineers have said, I just want to build my spaceship, my satellite, my technology. I don't want to respond to the customer that I have right now. That's bad. plain and simple. And what we've seen also are these ideas, these good ideas, maybe from a scientific perspective or engineering perspective, revenue model. I mean, that are really good ideas, but they are so out in terms of when they can deliver, and investors are going to look at that ROI. They're going to look at ways of, who's the market? What's your revenue stream? So, just as an example that I had in talking about the business kind of things, I was talking to somebody about marketing and how they needed to have a marketing plan, a marketing department, or people at least thinking about those marketing ideas. And the response was, marketing's like a Frankenstein monster. It's cobbled together and it kind of walks and talks. And my thought was, first of all, I laughed because, oh my God, yeah, marketing Frankenstein. And then I realized, whoa, wait a minute, that's the bad response, because wherever you are in your company's maturity, whether you're a startup or whether you're going after your fourth, fifth round of funding, you need to have a message. You need, again, be able to communicate what it is you're doing to your customers, to your investor, to yourself. Marketing should be done by everyone in the CEO to the janitor. And yes, I realize in startups that's the same person. But it is critical that everybody knows how and what the company's focus, company's mission. I've seen companies with no plan, no business plan, no project plan, no marketing plan. Again, there's a phrase that a goal without a plan is just a wish, and you can wish your life away, but you're not going to have a company at the end of it. I've seen companies with no vision at all. I was talking to another person who, back in July of a year ago, so Harvard Business Review had their whole magazine was devoted to marketing, and what they said was, they started off this article. They said, what marketers do to engage customers has changed almost beyond recognition. Yet the organizational structure of the marketing function hasn't changed in 40 years. And this person said, Yeah, it hasn't changed because it works. And in my mind, I mean, first of all, that's not logical, because the premise of this whole article was things have changed. We have social media now. All of these different means to get to customers, and you're telling me that the organizational structure, there's no problem with it. Again, it's a very closed-minded approach. When I was talking to somebody else, you have to know where the revenue is going to come from. You have to understand the customer and the market. So I'm getting a pitch from this guy about a new rocket engine. Well, it's not really new, but it's a rocket engine technology that this company wanted to build. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it and figure out, well, what's the purpose? What's the objective of this? Who's your market? Who are you going to sell this to? What's the purpose of this rocket in the consumer sense? Are you going to sell it to launch vehicles, or people developing launch vehicles? Is it for satellites? What's it for? He says reusability. So are you kidding me? I'm sorry, but reusability is not a market. It's an objective. It's a function. So these are the kinds of things that we are seeing. It is this war. Let's just call it the war. And it really shouldn't be. I mean, business and marketing, if they're done well and completely, they're complex enough. But if it's done by happenstance, it's like Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. It's a disaster.
Thank you, Kaki.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll talk about one of the things that I'm proud of that never turned into a commercial product or a real opportunity. We were I went back to Australia and decided to have another go at setting something up there. Unfortunately, it's something like the 18th or 19th largest economy in the world, and the only one down to about number 50 that doesn't have a space agency or a space program. But I went back, and they'd done their decadal effort of throwing $10 or $20 million in and seeing what happened. So we put together a project to deliver high-speed internet to Antarctica, and it was an interesting project. We had a defined little niche market, and I set about on my part of the project, or at least part of what I was doing was to look at that market and try and figure out how we would finance the thing beyond what we had from the government. And I ran into a couple of things. Firstly, trying to communicate the bigger vision for what we were doing, which was to not just fly nanosatellites and microsatellites to provide high-speed internet for Antarctica, but to use that as the thin end of the wedge to paint the sky black and provide high-speed internet for the world. Several years ago, crazy idea, lots of other people have had it. But we thought we had a niche that we could nail. And so I did that and successfully proved that there was a $20 million gap in our funding. And then started to run into problems. The $20 million funding gap, in my mind, that was the opportunity. We now had a demonstrated need for capital, additional capital. We had a market. This thing was not financeable on the back of the Antarctic internet thing. I mean, there's only so much porn that penguins want to watch. But the global market was, of course, huge. And if we could nail that niche and prove this could work, we could then expand into that and start looking at a lot more business plans. But to take that next step, I needed to take the team that we had and bring them with me. Now, the project was run in Australia. We had a consulting company that were very successful doing work for the Australian Defence Force, for the Australian government, but with a very much consulting mindset. So when we had won some money from the government to help kick it off, a lot of companies threw in some money as well. The project managers, they looked at this and said, well, it says here that we'll register some frequencies and reserve some frequencies, but it's not actually a deliverable. So we don't have to deliver that, we'll save some money. It was very much a consulting mindset. And the switch from consulting mindset to product mindset was a huge shift that these groups just weren't able to make. Similarly, to show that there was a $20 million funding gap, and that's what we needed to raise, was for them a signal of failure. You have failed to close the business case right now. And so they're embarrassed about that and didn't want to go out and talk about that. I think I would have got a very different reception here in Silicon Valley, and it's one of the reasons that I came back here or came here. But it just goes to show that the mindset of the team really does matter. You can have a big vision. You need to know where the customers are. You need the go-to-market strategy, and it's something that we really stress at Deep Space Industries. These asteroids are, it's a great idea, and it's going to be profitable in the long term. It's going to be relied on by most of humanity at some point, is the materials in free space. But unless you can bootstrap it, you're not going to get anywhere. So we need to have the bootstrap strategies. We need to have the defined need for capital. We need to have the return on that capital. It needs to make sense. And then you need to be in an environment in which it's financeable. So that's something that's important, is to bring a team that understands that and a team that can see that. And I'm glad to say that some of the radios that we built subsequently have, for the Australian program, subsequently got developed here in Silicon Valley by a different company, and so then those now exist, and we've moved the technology forward. There are now companies talking about painting the sky black with little communication satellites. All of these things came about. So I feel that I did my little bit for that part of the industry as well. But it was unfortunate that the team that we had, the location that we were in, the investors, the people who were stakeholders in that project, just weren't able to bring that idea forward. Despite that, I look at that and say, that analysis that I did is one of the best economic analyses and market analyses that I did, and we nailed exactly what the opportunity was. It still wasn't enough to get it over the line. You have to have the complete picture of a business. You have to have all of the parts, and it's got to make sense.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, following right on with that, I want to kind of turn the question around from an achievement to, okay, maybe one of your biggest disappointments or setbacks, and then what did you learn from that? Correct?
Yeah, so our investor that I mentioned before has a different model, or had a different model for what he wanted us to do, and he was not of the frame of mind to go for venture capital money. He wanted to do an organic growth sort of story. And so from the get-go, he laid down some constraints. One was that he was only putting money in once, and then we were on our own and sink or swim, and that captures your attention right there. We came back with him 3 weeks later and said, you got to write another check for this rocket cam line. Unfortunately, he's a smart guy, and he wrote another check. I think he was lying the first time, but ever since, we haven't really requested any funding from him since 2003, so that's 11 years. And so from then on, we've been trying to just very carefully execute and grow. And we started with 13 launches, 4 customers, because we bought this product line. Now we've been up to 84 different customers and 325 contracts. Checked it yesterday. And so that sounds nice, and it was nice, but the problem is that we're still a small company. We're only doing basically domestic sales, and it's all aerospace, and it's almost all space. We keep careful track of where we trace the money from. Most of our customers are actually companies, like 95% of them are companies. Other companies are like a second-tier supplier, but trace the money where it actually comes from. It's still about 75% or so the last few years from the government, somehow or another, mostly NASA and DoD. And the problem is, as Jason highlighted and some of the other panelists before lunch, most of the government-dominated procurement system is broken. And it's so hard to predict what's going to happen and how it's going to happen when, that our business is very, very hard to predict, and it's very lumpy. We call it a lumpy business model. And we don't have the scale yet to smooth out all these lumps. And so we have a very, what's disappointing to me, even after 14 years, we can't forecast what's going to happen 3 or 4 months from now. And if a larger company comes in, one came in, they were thinking of acquiring us, and their first question was, let's talk about your 5-year forecast. And we looked at each other and said, we don't even have a 1-year forecast. What are you talking about? So that discussion ended really fast. So So we're kind of in this zone where we've dominated our market. We almost owned it for 10 years. We're getting a little more competition, so we're successfully diversifying. And we really want to just grow, but that's a really hard thing to do when you're not in a scalable business like Planet Labs, where you're addressing the entire global market, or you're addressing something where everybody has something in their pocket that needs what you're trying to sell. That's not us. I wish we had a fraction of the GoPro market, you know. And we actually, about 5 years ago, we tried to diversify. This was our grand plan to get out of this mode, was to diversify. And so we literally looked at commercial aircraft, applying our products to commercial aircraft, private business jets, private airplanes, marine vehicles on the surface, below the surface, oil rigs, extreme test facilities, you know, homeland security, police cameras, police car cameras, UAVs, you know, everything. And there's hordes of competition in all those areas. We made no traction after like 4 years. And so we refocused back on space, and we're diversifying just within space, and that's working. But what we're really trying to do is get out of this sort of a squeeze we're in of we're not allowed, I guess, to go out and raise capital right now. And so we're trying to organically grow out of this. And that's pretty hard to do. But we're making a go of it, and we're as healthy as we can. So we think we're going to break out of this soon, but it's been kind of a challenge. And that was very humbling, because I basically left the space industry to speed things up. And launches every 4 to 8 weeks is great, but you know, I'd like a little more on top of that. So,
Thanks, Rex. Bruce?
So I guess I'd like to talk about the people aspect of this. Is all the entrepreneurial things I've done, and I've done a bunch of them, there's only 2 where I put in my own money. The other one, it was just pretty much sweat equity. And so, and there, it wasn't that they were bad ideas, but the one is just be careful about the personalities of the people that you're working with. You have to pick people that one, it really helps if you like them, because you're going to spend a lot of time together. It really helps. It's really important that you and that one, that you can trust what they say, and the other one is that you can trust that they will do what they say they're going to do. And if you find out that those things aren't true, then you need to take some corrective action. So this is kind of the ugly side. You know, nobody likes to admit failure. You know, nobody likes to be a quitter or whatever. But at some point, you know, you are throwing good money after bad, and you just got to say, you know, this dog won't hunt. And so one of the things I do, and maybe I hadn't thought of it, maybe this is the reaction to that, is so for the last 20 years I've taught risk management. So I teach project risk management at the university. And so one of the things that I tell my students is, you know, the Kenny Rogers test. You got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, you got to know when to walk away, and you got to know when to run. And so, and the sooner that you can if something isn't working, you know, change, fix it, or kill it, you know, is my advice to my students. So if you can change it, change it. If something's broken, can you fix it? But if you can't do either one of those things, and especially if you're not having fun anymore, you need to really look at exiting stage left or stage right, or whichever way that it works to you. And don't beat yourself up about it. But the other part of learn from it. One of the other things I tell my students a lot is there's plenty of new mistakes to be made out there. Let's not make the old ones over again. So what you want to do is you want to make sure, and this is where being kind of self-analytical in the situation, it can be very helpful of, you know, nobody likes to, I'm not saying go in and hang on forever to the past, but I mean to get, you know, wait a while, get some perspective, and then go back and review the situation. What happened? How did it happen? If I had this to do over again, what might I do differently? How might I handle things differently? And that might have given me a better result. So So that would be the kind of the thing that I would say. And there's something to be said for, to Daniel's, thing there. There's something to be said for a really well executed, good idea, well executed. I mean, welcome to Silicon Valley. That happens. I mean, life is not fair. The race does not always go to the pure of heart. That's why, Betamax got beat out by VHS. Beta was better, but VHS won. So, that's life. But this idea of, I think, of one, being honest with yourself about the situation that you find yourself in, not settling. So figure out what it is that you want, and if you're not getting it, then, change it somehow. And then learn from the situation, and don't give up, and do it better the next time. That's my advice.
Very nice, Bruce. Thank you. So for you, Khaki, they're really ugly.
Right, because I did the ugly. No, what he said. No, just briefly. There is a magnitude of unsupported optimism out there, and I see it. I see it frequently, and in talking about that discontent between the technologist and the business, it's hard. In some level, you don't want to squash that optimism, but on the other hand, you need someone to impart this realism into the idea, and part of what I think is so difficult is bringing people down to earth and saying, look, your idea is a great idea, but it's not a business. Work on it in your garage 25 years while you're in academia or government or private company, but it's not something to be captured on. And I don't know. Maybe that comes from where we are as a culture with the internet coming in, and anything's possible now. You have the internet there. You have apps. The Silicon Valley is booming, and so people come at this with this. Oh well. Yeah, if I can just build the satellite constellation to go around Mars, then I've got it made, and NASA's going to buy it, and industry's going to buy it, and I was like, how long do you think that's going to take you, and do you really think that you're going to make an income in the next year? So that's the kind of thing you can, yes. But again, bring it down to earth. What are the applications that we can apply right now, here and now, to earth or to something that already exists that will make it function as a business? And some of the things that I'm seeing, the businesses that are booming, that are at least sustaining themselves, are taking utilization of existing resources. And the ISS is one example, which is a completely underutilized facility. It's a great facility. How can we use that better? How can we use that more? The same rocket engine technology. So, that's what I'm seeing, and again, that's the battle, is just to bridle the optimism.
Very good. I have to say, at the Space Portal, we actually have an individual who does that for us. Because myself and Bruce, one of my other colleagues, Lynn Harper, we are unyielding optimists. And we have our colleague, Mark Newfield. We call him Mr. Worst Case Analysis. So whenever we have an idea, we take it to Mark. what could go wrong. Mark will come up with 5 or 6 things of what could go wrong. And so then yeah, wet blanket. So he does it kind of the ground. You're like, oh, you're right. Okay. And it is very helpful because you're right. It gets you grounded. Okay. Not that we lose our optimism, but it's tempered.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something the wet blanket, the skeptic. But in what I was doing in writing proposals, which your life is writing a proposal. I mean, if talk to a politician, their life is on the campaign trail. You have to write proposals for everything, but it's always about anticipating what the argument's going to be from the other side. And if you're unprepared for that, then you're going to stumble. You're going to run into these pitfalls because so that's the devil's advocate that I don't know. It's the sense I have, and you have to play it. And yeah, you have to be prepared.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. So I think you wanted the deepest, darkest, or something.
That you're willing to talk about.
Sure, I'll go back to my original theme and the second time that I was fired. The second time I was fired from my own company by the CEO that I'd hired. He proceeded to fire himself and everyone else in the company. We'd set up a company to do instrumentation for the mining industry, and had to teach myself nuclear physics and how to run a company and all of the other things that go along with building a technology. And all of that stuff had gone fine. We had the biggest mining companies in the world calling us and asking when they could buy the equipment. We told them to go away. We needed to scale by 3 on the flux in this instrument, which took us a couple of months. Anyway, we got the thing to work, and we hit all of the numbers right on the dot. We called back these companies and said, would you like to buy it now? How big is that check? And they tried to sell us pieces of themselves because it was January 2009, and there was no money in the world. Some of our prospective companies had, one of them had $100 million in the bank, and their total market cap was $20 million. That was the kind of environment we're trying to raise money into. So all of the options that we had for financing, from reverse takeovers on the stock exchange through to high net worth individuals and mining executives, all the way down to government-backed VC funds, they slowly evaporated one by one until even the government-backed venture fund turned into a sidecar, and our time to cash was longer than our runway. Which is when the CEO notified the board that intending to close down the company because he couldn't see a way out of that. Now, we didn't close down the company. We kept the patents, we kept the IP alive, but what happens then is the team disperses, and it's like running out of oil in an engine. It's not like running out of gas. You run out of oil, everything just stops. So that was sort of one of the worst times, and I can't blame anybody except maybe the guys that let Lehman Brothers go under and the real estate guys for making the bubble and bursting it. And it turned out to be a temporary hiccup in the market. It went back to a boom about 12 months later. But it had very much changed in character and in the investment characteristics. So we missed that by about 6 months. 6 months earlier, if we'd hit those numbers, we would have been able to raise the capital. So that's, it's important to understand your path to cash, your path to each of your funding milestones and liquidity. And no matter how good the team is, no matter how good the technology is and how much your customers want it, things can still blindside you. And that sucks. But I got to that position, to getting fired the second time, by quitting a few very interesting jobs because I had the goals of understanding how to build spacecraft and understanding to build a mining company and the technology and those kind of things. And I had that sort of driving thing through my career. The people that I most enjoy working with, the people that I want to hire, the people that I want to partner with, are people who have a passion to achieve something and the aptitude to learn and to go out and do it. those people always make the best partners because you partner with them and they're going to do it anyway, you just get dragged along. And so I've always sort of taken that as a bit of a principle in my life. I have this goal, I know what I intend to do. Now each of these steps is something that is going along in that direction. And I want to bring all of the people that I work with who have the skills and the talent and the resources and everything, I want to bring them along with me on that journey. And it's not linear. It doesn't succeed at every corner. Sometimes you get hit by things that are just completely random and they can take a huge knock on your life. And yet, the people that I want to work with aren't those that are smiling and pointing down the road and saying, that's the path I want to go. No, it's the guy who's trudging back going, with the scars and the thorns and the arrows going, don't go down that one, but he's got a grin on going, I'm trying this one next, right? That's the guy you want to go with. And they're a rare breed. You find quite a few of them in Silicon Valley, which is great. They're the people to team with.
That would make a great cartoon, by the way, or a great T-shirt. Yeah. I wanted to mention, I think there was a Harvard study actually on the success of startups. And he was looking at the team, the idea, the markets, and so on. And the only thing that correlated to any significant degree was timing. So, and right to what you were saying, that if the timing's wrong, it almost doesn't matter how good your team and your idea is. If you're trying to raise money and it's 2008, 2009, you're in deep stuff.
So I never believed that anything is anybody else's fault. All right, I chose to set up the company at that time. Okay, I didn't understand anything about timing at that point. So what I did later, a year or so later, I started a master's in economics because, God damn it, I want to understand the timing the next time round. And they talk about business cycles and the unpredictability and everything else, and it's a mug's game. But there are some meta cycles there, and there are things you can do to be prepared for what the cycles might do, and to consider the timing. And don't ever blame the universe, right? You can always do better.
I had a similar. So I had a similar kind of situation in the previous meltdown in 2000. I was with a photonics company, and we were selling into the telecom market, and it was very profitable. This was my first IPO. It was the first time I'd ever been a millionaire on paper. One of those things that you can't spend, but you can at least get the experience, that other than the IPO day, there was another day that on paper, with my stock options, I made $1 million. Now that's cool. Even if you can't spend it, it's still cool. You can think back on it. But just to show you how quickly you can think back on it, and in your old age, that helps. But here's the cautionary tale, because you all assume that, well, I'm a small guy, we're a little guy, and the big guys know it. We were kind of like a third tier. So we provided photonics compartments and to companies like JDS, Uniphase, and all that, and then they sold into the telcos. And so this whole thing and here shows you how quickly this can happen. In a period of 6 weeks from January to the middle of February in 2001, we went from our customers saying, you can't make the product fast enough to meet our demand, to we wouldn't take it from you if it was free. 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
And you know what the problem was? Missed the ball? It wasn't that our customer missed the ball. It's that the telcos totally lost sight of how to make money. They were doing all this expansion and putting all this money into this new equipment just because the other guy was. And everybody had totally taken their eye off who's making any money at this. And so finally it was this kind of industrial Ponzi scheme that somebody finally woke up and said, we can't do this anymore. This is stupid. And that collapsed. And it was this global meltdown that you saw in 2000 and 2001. And it took, several years for that to ripple through the system. And companies like JDS Uniphase wrote off something like $150 billion in goodwill because they had been doing all these acquisitions and paying all these premiums that they were carrying on their books as goodwill, and then they had to write all that stuff off.
So it just goes to show you that it's not just the little guys that kind of make these mistakes. Sometimes the big guys, Fortune 100 companies, they're not real bright either.
So I think we should say something a little positive about timing and randomness too. So if you happen to be prepared and aware and looking for opportunities, they do take time as well.
Now is a great time.
Now is an incredible
Now is a good time.
So I was at a tiny little conference in the Isle of Man, a little space conference. It's not even worth saying what the topic was. I was there mostly because I wanted to see the Isle of Man. And I ran into a guy at the bar, someone that I'd met at a couple of conferences before. You might know Rick Tomlinson. And we just got chatting about various things. And I said, look, here's what I know about mining, and here's what I know about tiny little spacecraft, and here's how I do it super cheap and get something like this off the ground. And he looked at me funny, pulled out a napkin, wrote a non-disclosure agreement on it, and passed it across the table. And that's how I ended up joining Deep Space Industries. And you know, I was living in the Netherlands at the time, so I got up at 4 a.m. to join teleconferences. And you know, you've got to put yourself out there and take advantage of these. And now here we are. So things do come up, and if you're ready for it, if you're prepared to go out on a bit of a limb and take those opportunities, they're there. And you say now is a great time. This place is buzzing because there are opportunities everywhere.
No, absolutely. And we're just about out of time, but let me just turn it over to see if there's any questions before we complete time. Anyone have a burning question? If not, I think I can ask Kaki if she wants to say anything else. Go ahead.
Yes. Particularly, can you hear me?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi, Andrew Newman. I'm a volunteer at NewSpace. How useful throughout your entrepreneurial journey have you found business plans for your startups and for others?
I'll make a comment on that. Business plans are pretty absolutely essential. It's the same with almost any plan. Once you have a plan, you have something you can change. But the day that you write it, it's probably 3 months out of date. It's just the nature of trying to collect that much information. If you do not plan, though, you've no idea where you're going or why. You can't communicate it to your team. You can't communicate it to your investors. You can't build your strategies and those kind of things. Successful companies, you know, they'll have a 5-year or even a 10, 20-year plan, and they'll change every 6 months. So it's the planning activity that is the thing. Writing it down on paper is also important because it captures it and lets you communicate it.
And for our investor, the billionaire I mentioned, he was a very seasoned business guy, very successful, and before he really started the company, draw up the paperwork, he asked me to write up a business plan for the company after we had handshaken on it. And I'd never even written a business plan, much less read one or anything. And so I bought a little paperback on how to write business plans to get money. That was the title. Followed it to the letter all the way to 40 pages. I submitted it, and I just spent all week writing it. And he looked it over, and he said, "Oh, that's fine." Shut it. We never did it again. He told me later it was just to see if I knew how to write and communicate, basically. And he was convinced, and so yeah, go ahead, let's do it. Never looked at it again.
So one final piece on business plan, I agree with exactly what Daniel and Rex said. The other point is the one of the good things about a business plan is it forces you to sit down and look at your assumptions. So all plans are based on assumptions. So what you want to do is you want to make them explicit, not implicit. So understand what your assumptions are, and if they're key assumptions, go verify them.
And I can take one more question over here.
Okay.
Then we're gonna have
As an entrepreneur of a startup, everything I've read has said, if you're doing a startup, get a mentor. Could the pluses of having and getting a mentor?
Well, I sort of by default, since I found our investor, I became CEO, and I had no business classes whatsoever. I've always been an engineer, never took an economics class when I was a professional, and so I had no experience. And fortunately, our investor volunteered to be our mentor, because he knew all of us were in the same boat. So, and he's clearly done his thing, so we rely on his insight on the business-related matters quite well. And then I still didn't think that was enough on day-to-day, so I joined a CEO working group in Pasadena that involved about 12 or 15 high-tech CEOs. And did that for about a year and a half, and every month we would meet at each one's company. We'd get a tour. We would go shut the door. Everybody would lay down what their dirt of the month was, all under like an agreement, this isn't leaving the room, and we would discuss which one of these ugly problems are we going to discuss together. We'd pick two, and we had this rigid process over about 3 hours to discuss, address, and then provide advice to that CEO, the sorry CEO that had that problem. And I'm really happy to know that all the problems I heard from the other 10 CEOs were much worse than mine. And so I was hardly ever the subject of discussion, but theirs were so bad, I couldn't even think of what I would do if I had that problem. It was so bad. You know, it's not mentoring per se, but just to hear other CEOs talk about their plight was so educational. I just went away thinking, I'm in great shape. I had no idea if I was in good shape, but I concluded I was.
Excellent.
Dan, one thought on that, if I may. You don't want a mentor. You want mentors, because they're going to be specialized. Everyone is going to have their areas of expertise. Not one person is going to be able to cover everything. So you want to reach out to as many people as you possibly can who are successful, who have gone through this before, and get their advice. And I love the idea of a support group. I mean, that's a, you know.
Yeah, you definitely need more than one.
Yeah.
But there's one more piece to that. Oh, sorry. There's one more piece to that, and that's pay it forward. So, you know, all of us were mentored and all that. So when you get to the back end of your career and you're busy and you're stressed and you got a lot of things on your plate and people are going to come to you, remember those people that took the time to help you and pay it forward.
Yep, do one last comment, then we have to run.
I was just going to say, every person who's involved with Deep Space Industries is my mentor. They some reason look for me to make decisions, to tell me what they should be. And everybody is an expert in what they're working on right now, and I'm lucky that we have an awesome team like that. But you know, every member of our board of directors I will call up when something is crossing my plate that is relevant to what they're doing. There are tough decisions all the time, you know, choices that need to be made, resources that need to be made. So I'm not shy to call anybody up. I've never actually had anyone, I don't think, that I've called a formal mentor. But there are some people who may be getting really annoyed by the number of times I call them. You can learn things from everybody. You learn things from the fellow entrepreneurs, even if it's just that other people's problems are worse than yours. That really helps. Get every scrap of information that you can and integrate it. That would be my advice. And if that for you means choosing a mentor and setting up some kind of rigid interaction, or I say rigid, formal interaction or structured interaction with them, that's great. That's an excellent idea. If it just making a habit of calling people, the big thing is you have to step back quite often and say, I don't need help on this question, but I want it. If I could get it, it might give me a different perspective. And if you can constantly go between focusing on a problem and then stepping back and going, all right, what can I learn and who can I talk to, and forcing yourself to make some time for that, then you'll get the most benefit out of the mentors and just everyone who's around you.
Excellent. With that, let me thank our panel and turn it on.
Got us to the next level is a unique opportunity that we took advantage of between 2011 and 2013 with the Space Portal at NASA Ames through a grant program. Through that program, we managed to award well over $200,000 in prize money to very deserving companies for the NewSpace Business Plan competition. And through that investment, we were able to also build our infrastructure and build our boilerplate for how we do things on a regular basis and made it more efficient. And it just became the competition that it is now because of this. So a big shout out to the guys at Ames, Bruce Pittman, who's sitting here, Dan Rasky, who I'll introduce shortly, and Alex McDonald, and Charles Miller, who actually kicked it all off for us. Thank you to those guys for making that happen. And of course, when we first got involved with Orbital ATK, it was simply ATK. But they have provided prize money, they've provided a lot of assistance in many ways, and we still have a relationship established with them, and we hope to continue that going forward. And they were our first major corporate sponsor for the NewSpace BPC, and they're still there, and we're still working with them. And so I want to be a big shout out to Orbital ATK for their support of this program. Now, here's what we decided to do. So far, we're extending our competition cycle to a 2-year cycle. So technically, looking backwards, we're already halfway through it because we're doing the competition next year. But we built up key things, and then we're going to now expand on those and launch them starting today. So we have developed an infrastructure of various industry resources, personal resources. We've reached out to the investor community in a big way. And we realized what we had built over the years was just an amazing mailing list and an amazing Rolodex of the kinds of people who can pitch in and help and who want to and who like it. And we have lots of coaches and judges and people that we have recruited. And it's a shame to only use those resources for a very brief period once a year. How else can we make this better? How else can we add more value to the contestants and the finalists for the competition itself? And so we're starting a longer competition cycle. It's a very different mode of entry, but finalists and some other groups will have access to these kinds of resources that we're going to be providing much earlier in the process than waiting until next July and just attending a boot camp for a day and a half. Basically, it's going to be an online boot camp that goes on for maybe 2 or 3 months prior to the competition. Into this group's meetings, they're in it's called NewSpace New York. And that's also run very, very well, and they're thrilled to be a part of this as well. And we're probably looking to do a second competition, regional competition, early next year. And there are groups in 2 other states that we're talking to right now, and there's a third one we just thought of last night at dinner. So we're going to be approaching them. The glue, the backbone, the core of a lot of our new initiative is going to be the new and ever-improving newspacebpc.com website. We started right now by first we're going to start the conversation. We've just launched a new forum page today. And so you can go there and sign up and create an account, and we're all going to start this conversation together, and that's how we start down this road, to get a little more social and a little more conversant and do a little more outreach through that portal. And we're going to use that portal for a lot of other things. We're going to be hosting, we'll have coaches hosting webinars and other kinds of things to help as the educational process, as our process towards the competition draws to a close. The contestants will have the opportunity to interact online with coaches much earlier in the process than they ever could before. They'll get assigned a coach sometime in April, and they'll be able to have long-term, long-growing conversations. Do this for me and come back in a week and tell me what you did, kind of thing. And that conversation will continue. And they'll be even more ready than they've ever been before when they finally get to the big show in July up in Seattle. So this is exciting. So get on there, create a profile, talk to us. Tell us what we're doing, tell us what you think we need to do. And to finalize, we're going to, since this is only a brief introduction, we've decided to have a little event that we're going to talk about this some more, and you're all welcome to join us. It's right next door in the next room over here. It starts at 5:45 this evening. It's a meet and greet open house. Anybody can come. Sponsored by Heinlein Trust, so you get to hear Art Dula and Buckner Hightower say their usual, inspiring and pithy words, and I always look forward to that. And there'll be some other announcements as well, but we'll all have a chance to chat in further detail about all the new great things that are coming down the pipeline with the NewSpace Business Plan Competition for 2016. It's going to shape up to be a battle in Seattle, and I hope you're all there. Thanks so much. Now, in the interest of efficiency, I have been asked the petition itself, and we're building and deploying some new tools to help do this, and it's going to be very encouraging for everyone. Let me go. So, as a result of that, we already have in the pipeline a wider variety of sponsors and collaboration partners and we're going to have bigger and greater prizes and what a variety of prizes going forward. Let's explain how that's going to work. We've really revamped our method of entering the competition itself. In the past, what we've done is essentially, okay, we declare the competition's open, send us your 2 or 3 page executive summary, and we filter that through a group of people that we recruit that actually look at these plans and look at certain parameters, and they score everybody, and we have lots of conversations, and so every once in a while a conference call from hell. And we end up with somewhere between 8 and 10 finalists as a result of that. We're going to do it. We're still going to do some of that. That option is still there. But now we're going to expand, and we're going to start earlier, and we're going to have actual regional, like mini competitions. The winner from each one of those will automatically become a finalist to be entered in the main competition next July. And why can we do this? Because funny things happen in the last couple of 3 years. Certain entrepreneurial incubator groups have started forming in key areas that's close to our industry, in New York, in LA, and in other places. And we're reaching out to those groups, and they've had a keen interest in hosting and sponsoring one of these mini regional competition events, which hopefully we'll stream online and do all those good things. So at least our goal is to have 4 to 5 of these over the next 8-9 months, and then winners from each one will be able to come and compete. And we'll also have some wild card entries that we'll get the old-fashioned way, in case they can't attend one of these events or for some other reason. And so starting out, our first 2 collaborators on this effort is an incubator down in Los Angeles called Lightspeed. And they've already volunteered to step up for our first session, which will be in October. So stay tuned. We're going to be announcing that, the exact dates and times and how to apply very, very soon. If you're not on Curtis's mailing list, get on Curtis's mailing list, because that's a lot of the information is going to be fed through that. And then the other group is, I've been to introduce the moderator for the next panel that's coming up with Space Entrepreneurs War Stories. I want to introduce to you someone I got a chance to, had the honor of working with when we were working with Ames at the Space Portal for the BPC for 3 years, and that's Dr. Dan Rasky. Now, here's a lot of things I didn't know about Dan. I knew he helped run the Space Portal, but I didn't know that he was like this expert on advanced entry systems and thermal protection. He actually invented something called a phenolic impregnated carbon ablator that is actually now being used by SpaceX on their Dragon capsule. It's also being used in other probes like the Mars missions and the which one is it? No. Stardust, I'm sorry. It's the Stardust return capsule. Made one of the fastest re-entries ever in the history of return capsules. It hit about 50 Gs, I understand. But obviously the heat shield held together and the capsule held together, and all was well with that. But he has made significant contributions to flight hardware used on NASA missions and private missions. And he actually got an Inventor of the Year award for 2007. Was the first person from Ames to get that award. So he's going to be moderating the panel. Please welcome Dan Rasky.
Thank you very much. Could my panelists join me up front here? Let's get comfortable. So hopefully this up, testing, good. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for letting us, not up. Is it up? Up? No. Hello?
Houston, we have a problem.
Hello?
Triple redundancy.
Hello. Oh, that's working. Well, welcome everyone. And I am pleased to be able to moderate this panel. And I want to start off with a couple words. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And no, I'm not describing my panelists.
Welcome. Hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. I'm sorry we had to start a little late, but I want to talk to you very, very briefly about the new, improved, better than ever NewSpace business plan competition. In case you noticed, we didn't have a BPC this year, and probably some of you have wondered, hey, Tom, why wouldn't we have a BPC this year? Well, let me tell you. As we were going through our usual ramping up process and we were talking to new prospects, we were always out fundraising and doing other things and finding ways to collaborate. And all these opportunities started coming our way that would not come to fruition until 2016. And we sat down and we took a good hard look at all this and says, why don't we punt for this year? And then go around and build something really incredible, the kind of BPC that we've always wanted to build in the first place. We sat down, not with a blank sheet of paper, mind you, but just with the idea that if the funding was not so much a problem, if there was other things that what could we want, what do we really want to do? If we could put anything down on a piece of paper to make this BPC even bigger and better than ever. And we looked at the resources that were coming down the pipeline, and we looked at each other, we said, you know, we can do not all of this stuff, but we can do a bunch of it right now in 2016. And that's what came out of this. And I'm going to go forward and just give you a brief introduction today on what we have to look forward to for next year. But first, as I always do in presentations like this, I like to say thank you. We have gotten as far as we have and built this great infrastructure with the help of a lot of really great people and a lot of great resources. And I want to take a minute just to give a shout out to those who have really been of value to us in building the business plan competition into what it is today. And I certainly want to start with the Heinlein Prize Trust. They have been the earliest of early adopters of our program. For over a decade, they have provided us. They started out with little bits of money and says, well, let's see what these guys can do with it. And it has grown and grown and grown. And they've always been just ardent supporters of our cause and of what we do. And I'll be talking a little bit more about them later, but I want to thank them very much. Also, another great supporter of ours has been the Space Angels Network. Now, they don't provide prize money per se, but they provide something of equal value, which is themselves. They have a really incredible network that they've built of angel investors and advisors and and coaches and other kind of people. We've gotten some great coaches and even some great judges out of Space Angels Network over the years, and we still hope to have a continued collaboration with them. They've been a contributing sponsor for a very long time, and we're going to continue that relationship. But we're really